Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Red Lettuce. We have some of our good friends back on the show with us, author and activist and journalist Danny Haiphong and filmmaker David Yun. Thank you both for joining us again. We are so excited to have you back here. Before we start diving into our topics today, for those of you watching, please be sure to like and subscribe and to help support our show. But also, real quick, could you both tell us where to find your work and what you've been up to since we last saw you?
David, how about you start?
Okay. I produced one project, and it's on YouTube. It's called Loyal Citizens of Pyongyang in Seoul. It's on YouTube. And since then, since the last time I've talked to you guys, I believe it's been a good couple of months. I've been just going to school, working from home, going to school. Yeah.
That's
How about you,
awesome to
Danny?
do that during all of this nonsense happening.
Yeah. Well, okay. So since I've been last on, first you can find me on Twitter at Spirit of Ho. It's in the handle here. You can also find me on Facebook, weekly at blackagendareport.com. And you can find me on Patreon at patreon.com/JannyHaiphong. Since we last spoke, I have been collaborating with Margaret Kimberly at Black Agenda Report, doing a monthly program, The Left Lens, which you can find on YouTube. Just type in The Left Lens Black Agenda Report. And so subscribe to that for sure. And yeah, I've just been doing a lot of writing. I have an article in Canadian Dimension about China and US fear mongering being rooted in racism. I have been writing a lot about China and Aquafina's latest program, and how that reinforced a lot of new Cold War mythology. I've also been organizing with New Cold War. No Cold War, not with the New Cold War, but at No Cold War. You can find us at nocoldwar.org and find all of our prior events that we did during the summer and into the fall. So yeah, that's where I've been. It's been kind of hectic, and I've been doing that all from home since the pandemic continues to rage on in the United States.
Busy bees. We love your work so much, both of you. So we're like just so thankful that you took the time to hang out with us and talk smack about capitalism and racist people. So let's get right into it. Since we last spoke to both of you, racism towards Asian Americans, specifically Chinese Americans, has increased. We have elected officials like Marsha Blackburn spewing racist lies on Twitter about China, and journalists like Glenn Greenwald playing into the unfounded claims of China covertly working with the Biden campaign. Can you tell us your thoughts on Biden's foreign policy picks so far and what it signifies, and what's at the root cause of the Cold War mentality towards China and other socialist states like the DPRK, Vietnam, Laos, that we see among liberals and conservatives and the synthetic left?
Yeah.
So I'll start with Danny.
Yeah. Yeah, wow, there's a lot packed into there. Well,
Yeah,
let me know if I didn't answer any part of that, but yeah, I think what is at the roots of this new Cold War mentality with China and the continued antipathy that the United States and the Western world shows toward socialist countries in the Asia Pacific, but more so specifically everywhere. Anywhere where there's socialist countries, Cuba, we can add in there. So really what's at the root of that, I think, is first, although we are in a new Cold War, it wasn't as if the old Cold War really ended. I mean, the United States ended up becoming the single hegemon in the world when the Soviet Union fell in 1991, but that didn't necessarily mean that somehow anti-communism left with it. That was always a complete and utter myth spread by the bourgeoisie, the media, and really this arrogant hubris embedded in this kind of liberal capitalist, neoliberal capitalist order that came up out of that, because the neoliberal capitalist order was really okay with the ultra-right anti-communist elements within the ruling class, and it was really a merger between the two that we've seen be carried forward into this new period where the end of history was declared in 1991, but China never ceased being a country that at its base was socialist and was run by the Communist Party of China. Vietnam never stopped being a country that was run by the Communist Party of Vietnam. We can go down the line. The DPRK, the Korean Workers' Party, never ceased having power despite starvation, sanctions, and all sorts of war maneuvers against it. So it was always a myth that somehow socialism was over just because the United States ended up being the sole hegemon after 1991. And the real fear that these countries, which are growing at a rapid pace, especially China, Vietnam, Laos, I know we want to put in there as well, in just the entire Asian world, really, that the East is moving. Even the capitalist countries are moving in a direction of growth. Of course, countries like India practice a different kind of model of growth, but at the end of the day, I think there is this fear that Asia is and the East is going to surpass the Western world. And with China in the lead overall as a socialist country, this raises extreme fears by big capital. And the fears are both unfounded in the sense that they're rooted and driven in racism, this idea of yellow peril, and the idea that China is somehow out to get the United States is just a racist justification for the new Cold War policy. But there is a legitimate fear that will be realized, which is that China and, in effect, all of the countries that are allied with China will have superiority in the areas of tech, high technology, infrastructure development. Some of this has already happened. High-speed rail, for example, 5G telecommunications. Some of this has already happened where the United States is lagging behind, and so is the Western world as a result, because the Western world feels that that it must follow the United States wherever it goes. So I think that's really what's rooted in all of this. And when we look at the Biden picks, we see diversity and this con game that the ruling class is playing with liberals and playing with the left, nominating all of these war hawks like Lloyd Austin, who's on the board of Raytheon, like Anthony Blinken, who's been advising Biden since well before he whispered in Biden's ear to support the invasion of Iraq. We're seeing how these figures who are supposed to be representative of the population, like Neera Tanden or Susan Rice, are getting all of these nominations. Pete Buttigieg, Department of Transportation, like ridiculous to think that these very highly conservative corporate elements within the Democratic Party are being peddled as somehow a shift from what the Trump administration represented. But really what we're getting is a new form of the same old imperialist policy. And it's very clear that's going to happen, which there are some folks who want to see with Biden, potentially a shift with Iran, potentially a shift towards Venezuela, potentially a shift towards China, maybe to, even if it's not a peaceful policy, it's more conciliatory in some ways. I hate to break it to people, but it's probably more likely that what we're going to see is a humanitarian interventionist line towards all of these countries, justifying very similar policies, perhaps even more effective in the fact that they are more based in logical progression, the logical progression of imperial aggression, rather than just, kind of flying off the handle and calling for, the overthrow of Venezuela, for example, and trying to push Guaido. It may be a more tempered and effective policy, which will be no less damaging to international relations and to the future that I think countries like Vietnam, China, and the DPRK, et cetera, want to see, which is a future of peace and prosperity for everybody, not just themselves. They're not just in it for themselves. They're in it for everybody's well-being, because if everybody is doing well, then their particular situations can only improve. So I think that's where I would open on all of those questions. A very good set of them for sure.
Excellent. Thank you for that. David, what are your thoughts on all of this?
I have to say that I was not, I guess, fully aware of until this year, until COVID-19. I was not fully aware of racism against specifically Chinese folks here in the United States. And before, so when when you guys told me about Danny and things like that about today, I was kind of looking, I was snooping around the internet just to see what people on the internet seems to think and things like that. So I wanted some pretty weird sites and things like that. But I remember one of them, I forget the name, but it was just like a random forum, political discussion forum, and the top votes, like the comments that had the most comments, sub comments and likes were saying things like China is on the move. Sooner or later we're going to be put up against the wall and shot because that's how communism works. And it's insane that we have, on the one hand, we have a country that is arguably the leader in higher education, right? Like US universities are world renowned, things like that. But we have also an international level of stupidity, also, and ignorance in the country, which is crazy, right?
Yeah.
We have the most coveted universities, but we also have the stupidest people on this planet. And I feel like it's at one point stupidity can be very dangerous. I think clearly it's takes form in when we saw Asian grandmas getting attacked in New York. I believe there was one in Koreatown in LA as well. But things like that, I feel like it's something that I think you might have mentioned doesn't really quite. It's not really quite included in the package of mainstream discussion. So I guess I'm not really an expert on this topic. I'm really more of a student. So I guess I really want to ask Danny. It's not. This is something that I feel like when you look at like the word tentacle, right? When talking about China, the word tentacles is used a lot. Dirty Chinese 5G tentacles. Groping the Western world. And I think it's really interesting because when you look at anti-Chinese propaganda from like the early 1900s, you see the same picture of like a political cartoon of like a Chinese octopus with tentacles, like trying to grope around and trying to enter the West and things like that. So I guess my question that I'll be curious to ask Danny is, how do you see the U.S. and the U.S. public more like kind of moving away from, I guess, this, what I would call brainwashing, right? Decades of brainwashing, specifically to China. Because I feel like, whereas the U.S. has, of course, already brainwashed opinions about, let's say, the DPRK, I do feel like it's different for China in the sense that no one is expecting North Korea to take over the United States, right? Like maybe like something that they may say is like, oh, North Korea wants to nuke the United States, but I don't ever hear, oh, right, like Kim Jong-un is going to be our next president unless we do something about it or something like that. But we do hear things like, oh, Xi Jinping is gonna take over the United States,
Yeah.
So I do feel like it's a different kind of threat. So yeah, what do you think about that?
Well, it's very astute. That's a very astute observation, and it's very true. I've been thinking a lot about, and we can get into sort of what Glenn Greenwald is surmising, because it's sort of a more intelligently articulate position that reinforces everything that you're saying, because his position is that China, and this is true of a lot of so-called liberal, really libertarian elements in the independent media who believe that China and Wall Street have been in cahoots, and that in and of itself, that collaboration between China and Wall Street represents a real interference in U.S. political affairs. It's all about how China is weighing down the United States, and it reinforces that tentacle image again, that very yellow peril kind of thinking. And I think the biggest reason why it's different, the smears against the DPRK are many, and it's almost like a monthly tabloid. And it's tabloid-like. I think that's the way we can really put it. The smears against the DPRK. It's all about, is Kim Jong-un dead? All of these so-called dissidents or exiles who leave or disappear, they die, and then they turn up. There's all of this really what I think just intelligence games, right? It's almost like a game for them, and it's all about this broader strategy toward them. But there is, no threat, right? There is no so-called quote unquote DPRK threat, but there is a quote unquote China threat. And I think it's because China is actually a competitor, not in the way that we with that capitalists see competition, right? Because capitalists see competition all about a zero sum and about who will win in the game of spoils and profits, but it's really a competition of systems. And what's directed at China is this fear that a different system, a socialist system, is going to be the global leader in all things around the world, politically, militarily, economically, all of it. All spheres of influence will be led by China, and that's a legitimate fear. And I think that's what conjures up even intelligent people like Glenn Greenwald, who's written amazing, you know, investigatory pieces about Russiagate and about smears on journalists and on activists and on politicians about Russia. But Russia isn't competing with the United States in that way. Russia actually has a capitalist model, and Russia is seen more as like this weak country that its power is overblown, while China is seen as a country that is already even with the United States, and actually in some ways more powerful if you can somehow make the conclusion that China and Wall Street are interlocked forces of evil. And I think it gets back to what racism is really all about, right? It's about trying to paint oppressed people as inherently evil, as dangerous, right? As a complete risk to the humanity of the so-called benevolent, white Eurocentric, what it means to be human. And that's what is being reinforced over and over and over again about China, because there is this legit fear of Chinese socialism with, socialism with Chinese characteristics is posing to them as a real threat. It's not something that they can collaborate with, because they feel that investments in things like high-speed rail and infrastructure and high technology to underdeveloped countries, the United States finds all of that as completely out of the realm of possibility. But with people like Glenn Greenwald thinking that just because the US and China had business relations, that means Wall Street and China are one and the same, is just part of, I think, this long process that you were talking about that is over a century long, of trying to paint a force like China and a people as somehow inherently aggressive and inherently trying to undermine what? They're trying to undermine the United States' way of life. And that's so ironic when that's what Russiagate was really all about. It was reinforcing the same evidence-free conspiracy theories rooted in anti-communism, all the same, right? Because even though Russia is not a socialist state, its century-long, nearly century-long history of socialism still to this day peppers how people think about Russia. And you see all the liberals with their strange Trump hammer and sickle signs, and Putin with the hammer and sickle, all this nonsense. But yet you can believe the same thing about China and it doesn't even cross your mind. Actually, someone who subscribes to Glenn Greenwald's Substack sent me one of his comments back to them about it, and he doubled down and said, well, it's absolutely ridiculous to think that the US is on a war path with China. If you look at what this professor said, he said that Wall Street and China work hand in hand. And if you see who Biden is nominating, you can see that China and Biden are going to be working together, that they don't need to wage war with China. And absolutely all of that has no basis in reality. I mean, the Obama administration was really aggressive towards China. It was different. It was a different tone. And for sure, there was a lot more cooperation at that time. But to think that somehow, because this professor, Di Dongsheng, who was really talking about just the fact that Trump was an outsider and that all of these corporations that were attached to Wall Street, that were attached to Washington, would pressure politicians to do business with China because it was beneficial for them, that somehow you can insinuate and you can conclude that this means China is interfering in the affairs of the United States. That's absolutely ridiculous. That's like Wall Street is the US economy. Wall Street has a hand in every single corporation, monopoly, anywhere you go. You have to deal with Wall Street if you deal with the United States. So what do you want China to do? Stop dealing with the United States? Then that's cutting yourself off from 25% of the world economy. And look at, to be honest, although the DPRK, good living standards for its people, I mean, it's very limiting, right? Like these sanctions are very limiting. People don't want to be living under sanctions. So what are you going to sanction yourself? It's ridiculous. It's illogical, but that's what racism is. And so, yeah, that's how I would interpret these kind of real racist and just anti-communist tropes towards China, and the fear. It's a fear. I mean, honestly, like sometimes it feels like you just want to kind of bask in it. It's like all these tears of sorrow that that imperialism is, on the decline. It's like, you just kind of laugh at them at times, but it's, in the heart of hearts that it's going to be very influential toward policy. And that's what is, I think, most disturbing.
Yeah. Also, I guess speaking of, racism, I think we should also take a moment and talk about the COVID numbers in the DPRK in China. A lot of people claim that, oh, these are fake. These are all being, these are all lies. The government's covering it up. I mean, what's the basis of that? Like, why should we assume that they have any reason to lie about these cases? It's just ridiculous.
David, would you like to touch on that first, since you're the one short on time?
Yeah, I mean, for the DPRK, I mean, well, with China, I think it's both. I think when it comes to this, is how I think of it. When it comes to these news article titles, I really feel like they left it up to some intern who has no idea what he's doing, and then they don't cover up their tracks, and a month later they make some kind of contradiction in the titles, because like when China did something, they call it draconian, and then a month later the US would do the same thing, but or even better, a different country, a different Western country would do the same thing, but they would say, oh wow, look how they're handling it, they're doing a great job. And so it doesn't really look like they're even trying to cover up their steps of but yeah, in terms of the DPRK, in terms of having 0 cases, you can say, sure, maybe there's one, maybe it's not 0 cases, right? But the fact of the matter is that the state is not under lockdown, and North Korea is not a state where you can fake that. Like the DPRK does not have the capacity to fake not having a pandemic, right? Like it does not have the means to do that. And so even if it's not 0 cases, right? It's clearly not enough so that the entire, even the capital has to shut down in any way. It looks at a strict mask policy and social distance policy and things like that. But the DPRK is not. It's the same rhetoric as like oh, when you visit, everyone's pretending. The church is there; they're all fake, and they're all the parishioners are all actors. And, I mean, clearly the DPRK has the best actors in the world because of all ages, clearly. But yeah, North Korea doesn't have the capacity or the means to fake, a thriving society or a surviving, sustainable society with a while hiding a COVID-19 pandemic underneath. That's just not possible. I mean, even the United States can't do that. And yeah, and with in terms of DPRK, it's, the 0 cases was confirmed by the WHO, I believe. I believe that was the organization.
Yeah, 0 deaths.
Right. And it's really convenient how, when you look at those articles, it's really convenient how the journalists kind of word it. They make it really sound like North Korea is some kind of weird wonderland where fantasy, it's like where people are flying or floating, it's just weird. It's just like you read these articles and you're like, what the hell is happening over there? Like, it doesn't seem like a real place. And I think that's very dangerous, because when you start, it might seem harmless at first, but I think when you look at other statistics, like back in when Trump was talking about fire and fury, I believe one poll showed that almost 33% or 25% of Americans were supporting preemptive nuclear strike. Right. So I think that's what happens when you create when you create an image of a country where the people are not really people, but they're just almost fictional characters that are doing these weird things. Right. And I think that it seems silly at first, but I think it can lead to very dangerous thinking. And I think with China now, it's really funny how, the US was calling China this, calling China that, when China was struggling. But now that China's back on its feet, the US is all quiet now. Right. I mean, where do those insults go? Now the US is the worst country in the world handling COVID-19. And I think it's like I said, it's almost as if like an intern is running these titles. Because there's no accountability for the same, like for CNN, if CNN released something last month, but now this month they're releasing completely different, it looks like they don't even try to, cover that up, at least acknowledge it or anything like that. Yeah.
I love going back and finding like articles that like expose those contradictions. Like there's this, when I was doing a bunch of research on like Uyghurs and anti-Islam in China, I found this ABC article. Like it's literally called "Is Xinjiang the next haven for Al Qaeda?" And I was like, here it is. There it is. We knew. And so then later we end up telling on ourselves, and like liberals don't know what to do. Like you present them with their liberal sources and you're like, what's going on here? There's no continuous narrative. It skips. It's almost like a really bad TV show with like every plot twist is like time travel.
Yeah, the DPRK is the hermit kingdom, right? That's the way it's framed. And I was looking through the DPRK's state media during the pandemic this summer, and what's so interesting is that it's not the most verbose thing, KCNA. It's mostly just announcements that are very short in character, but you do see the kind of measures that were being taken right when China's first case was made aware. There was a massive campaign to basically disinfect the country in a bid, right? Close the borders, disinfect everything. They were going into even like just all the products, anything, everything was being disinfected. And so there was a big campaign to try to prevent any cases. So it shouldn't be a surprise that the cases were very low in the DPRK, given that both Vietnam and the DPRK were taking measures very actively at the early stage before, and these aren't countries that were getting like a crazy, Vietnam maybe more, but these countries don't get a crazy amount of travel from Europe, where it probably actually originated. So, they were really just fighting the outbreak in China, fighting to prevent the outbreak in China. And so you'd have to be completely racist and have a real stake in imperialism to believe that it's so far-fetched that the DPRK could have succeeded, especially because the DPRK is alive and surviving despite some of the strongest sanctions that exist worldwide, and has been able to do things like, keep people housed with no rent. I mean, there are expats who will tell you that people live in the DPRK rent-free. Like to be able to do that despite the fact that you're cut off from most of the international market, except really for China, It's incredible. I mean, that's an incredible feat, and it shows that there is a large amount of mass popular work and organization that goes into addressing these kind of problems. And the same
Right.
goes for Vietnam to be able to survive. I mean, still bombs are going off in Vietnam, landmines are going off.
Agent
Same goes
Orange.
for
Yeah.
Laos, yeah, and they're still able to grow at this rate that they are. I mean, that just shows that there's a massive level of popular organization, which I think the US mindset, because the corporate media, as you were saying, David, it is run by these real low life hacks that honestly, we know rich people don't work, right? We know that capitalists don't work. So those who are, who are actually working, they happen to be they're even more slimy than their bosses, because their bosses, maybe the brain trust, right? They may be pushing ideas, but they're not working. So they're getting all of these low life hacks like Josh Rogan or whoever it is to push all of these anti-communist myths. And they often do a bad job of continuing that in a convincing way when the United States and the West run into the inevitable crises that are just inherent to their system. So right now, the United States is in complete shambles, and it shouldn't be so convincing, but uh, it has been, right? I think that this new Cold War drive has been convincing to a lot of people because the United States has had this long historical pattern of when there is a social crisis, an economic crisis on hand, there's always been a very strong impetus and a real large infrastructure, media, the state, everything is organized to shift the blame onto very convenient targets, which the United States had wanted to either eliminate or control anyway. And that goes for China. That's been China since 49, regardless of normalization. There's always been a desire for so-called regime change, for some kind of shift in China. DPRK the same way, but even domestically, right? Whenever something bad goes on, it's always the undocumented. It's always Black people. It's always, that's because there's already a policy of elimination or exploitation specific to those communities. And when there are real problems, it's their fault, or it's the fault of Russia. And I think that that's just real. That's just ingrained. That's not even, there's an infrastructure for it, but it's also just an inherent response to how you deal with these crises. You can't admit that that everything about your system is completely and utterly unprepared and not built to address something like a pandemic, which should have been contained, 6-9 months ago in the United States. It should not have been going on this long, but just
Now
look at
they're
what
talking
we're
about it
dealing
like
with.
extending into 2022, and I just
Yeah.
it
Yeah,
just
because
blows my
vaccines aren't a
mind.
cure. Yeah.
Yeah,
What's a
yeah,
vaccine a cure? It's not. It's not a cure.
yeah. So
It
would
takes
you
a while.
attribute like DPRK's low numbers and success and survival of this pandemic to socialism, or just pure dumb luck because it's so isolated from like the world?
I think one thing that, whether you criticize or you love the DPRK, I think the one thing that is easily observable, it is a highly mobilized and disciplined populace. I think that's something that I think is very easily observable. And this, of course, this does not mean every single person agrees with everything that the government does, or anything like that. But I think at least in DPRK, if it's in a matter of, for example, one state media that I read was that the state provided these ebooks at the beginning of the pandemic, explaining everything from what we know about the virus so far, why we have to social distance, why we have to wear these masks and things like that. And it's it one thing that I've always appreciated about the DPRK was that there's a very big emphasis on education. So even in for farmers, they get free college level education at nighttime. Factory workers, they have free education at nighttime, things like that. While also, again, with the United States, we have these world famous colleges, but we have people saying masks are oppressive to my freedom and things like that. And yeah, I think I think it was, I think, the early action, as soon as China started reporting cases, shutting down. I mean, I imagine this must have been very tough for the North Korean economy, but shutting off all trade routes with China, because they were worried that the virus might be on the actual train and all the trams and things like that. I mean, like what Danny said, they disinfected literally everything. I think what's even more amazing, and this of course didn't get any international attention, but North Korea was also hit by a typhoon this year, and it destroyed thousands of homes. And in the matter of a month or two, the North Korean, Korean People's Army (KPA) built over, I believe, 1,000 homes in over a month. And
they look beautiful.
Yeah, right. And and we're talking about a heavily sanctioned country, and I think it just shows, when you have a certain level of not only unity, but a certain level of institutionalized, readiness to help people when these natural disasters hit. This is what's possible, right? So if you imagine if the DPRK can do this, imagine what the United States can do for its people with all our money, right? It's insane, right? It's insane. Yeah, and one thing that I would, I guess, like to throw out while we're on this topic of Biden and things like that for everyone, really. I'm curious to what you guys think. When we look at as communists, we see liberals as it's frustrating, right? It's frustrating because on the one hand, it's yeah, everyone hates Trump. That's not really, like most people have because Trump doesn't really make himself into like a likable person on TV and things like that, unless you support him, I guess. But I would argue that the more youth has been, especially through the BLM protests, things like that, because unfortunately, I think every time these movements happen, to a certain extent, it's a trend, right? For a lot of the youth, it's a trend. And so whether because it's a trend or not, I think, at least from my limited experience and exposure, I would say that a lot more youth has been more politicized, right, interested in politics. But of course, it doesn't lead them, their resources for political education doesn't lead them to being a socialist, right? It leads them usually being a liberal. My question is, Trump is probably an unprecedented figure that pushed a lot of these youth to being political, right? And so while their first answer or their first, I guess, position might have been a liberal and supporting Biden, right, to get Trump out of the office, right? But do you think that it will be a repeat of Obama, where Obama was doing all these war crimes and his liberal fan base wasn't doing anything? Or do you think that because more youth has been politicized, this is like a new playing field almost? Do you think that they will be more? Do you think it'll be a repeat of Obama, or do you think Biden's administration will be? I don't want to use the word held accountable, because I know that's the word liberals like to use. But yeah, you guys know what I mean.
So a friend of mine, Sammer, has said that there's no accountability for elected officials. They need to atone for their crimes. Like, you can hold your friend accountable for saying something like shitty or racist, right? But like people who murder people need to atone for that. And so I've been saying it the whole primary, like that the Biden administration would be like a continuation of the Obama and Bush administrations. And so far what we see are Biden stacking his cabinet with like the same people, but just like coded under diversity, so that any critique of them is like seen as a critique of like, oh, well, you hate Black people, or like, right, oh, you hate Indigenous people, or you hate or queer people, or whatever, I think it's much more sinister. And I think that I fear for, Biden was like the one Democrat I was like, I will absolutely not vote for that guy. Absolutely not. I'm not going to do it. I'll consider voting for just about anyone else that they've got up there, except for Biden, and Petey McFeety. But that's like another. Anyway, but no, I think that what we're going to see is much more sinister and much more successful than Trump. Trump has he's escalated things,
right?
But I he's like to the left on Biden on some foreign policy stuff, because unfortunately Biden and Obama, they invaded 5 countries, and look at Libya, look at like Syria. I think Syria was only able to come back because Obama wasn't like in office. Like I really think that it's like because Trump is like not interested in invading countries, but also really bad at it. That that's not an endorsement of his policies or anything like that, but that's just not like an observation. Like I think in terms of like the rest of the world, Trump is better because he's such an idiot. And I think we're going to see something much more sinister. I think that they're going to get a lot of support from liberals who like, oh well, Trump's gone, so the problem is solved. I'm already seeing a lot of people saying like, oh, you need to be nice, and like, he's not in office yet, you can't critique him. And it's like, well, he's got this Raytheon guy as his Secretary of Defense. What? And of course, Elizabeth Warren, of course, Bernie Sanders, any progressive that supported Medicare for all, nothing. They're getting nothing. They're not being vetted for anything. So you have to wonder like what his true agenda is. Whether he's a sock puppet for the ruling class, which he is. Like he doesn't even know he's alive. So that's my thoughts on it.
Yeah. Well, man, this question, it's a big one. I think that it's important from some people I was talking to realize that not everyone, I think there's this idea that the world was rooting for Biden. Part of it was because of during the Obama period, there was this kind of international, there was the liberalization of the global order overall is a real thing. I mean, it did happen. And there was this idea that Obama would bring some quote unquote sanity. And it was coming after the Bush period, which had seen, the 2 invasions. I mean, those are central issues, right? I mean, the Afghanistan and Iraq, they are really the center almost of the planet, and so anything that happens in that region really affects everything from east to west. And so there was this hope, I think, from a lot of countries that Obama would bring some sanity, maybe pull that stuff back. And even if it's not adequate, it's something, there's some breathing room there. That didn't happen, of course. We saw that the wars went from 2 to 7 or 8 or something like that. But there was, I mean, a lot, from what I've heard from a lot of people that I know close to things in China, that a lot of people in China and a lot of people in the Communist Party were hoping that Trump would win. And that was because there was this, despite the new Cold War, despite the consequences of it, there was this isolation of the neoliberal forces inside of China, which was very helpful towards consolidating certain things and moving certain things along, because those pro-American, pro-Western types had a lot less legitimacy inside of China during this period, because look at what Trump is doing, look what the administration is doing. You could really harness a kind of nationalist political orientation toward the socialist priorities and priorities that are maybe not as possible when there is this kind of friendlier face in office. So that those kind of conflicts do exist around the world. Those people have those conversations all of the time. So it's like picking your poison almost for people around the world. And for socialist countries, it's it usually doesn't make too much of a difference who's in office. Biden is going to be a hawk toward all of these countries. I know Vietnam kind of gets less attention, but we can look, Biden and Kamala Harris, they don't even want to talk to the DPRK, right? We're going to see a real aggressive posture there. I think it's important to recognize that there was a difference in foreign policy, and part of it was that while Trump did some heinous things in terms of foreign policy, the sanctions in Syria, Iran, all of that, those are heinous crimes, increasing drone strikes, all of that. heinous crimes. But there was a level of ineptitude that I think a lot of the elite saw, which made it hesitate on some of these larger strategic priorities. There was a hesitation to invade Syria on the basis of Trump leading that, because he is the commander in chief after all. There was a hesitation on even trying to lead direct attacks against Venezuela. We saw even when he tried to directly attack Venezuela, it was a complete and utter failure. It got Silver Corps Corporation got exposed. The Venezuelan government knew about it before it happened, and it was a botched attempt. So all of that shows that there is this disorganization that came with Trump in the foreign policy arena that was advantageous. The left didn't take advantage of it. So now we have the reconsolidation under Biden, which presents, I think, deeper challenges for the left, in that Biden, I don't think, will be able to lull people to sleep as effectively as Obama, but that impetus from the Obama period, that kind of internal development of that just extremely harmful consciousness that was imbued on so much of the so-called left-leaning population in this country and in a lot of the West will, I think, make a big impact on how quickly people respond. Because I don't think we're going to see what happened with Obama. We're not going to see no resistance like under Obama, where it was almost a counter-revolutionary resistance we were constantly facing. Criticize him and you're public enemy number one. But with Biden, it will be just a slow roll towards people, maybe toward the end of his term, realizing that this is a huge problem. We'll probably be going through, a 3-4 years of economic crisis. That will teach, I think, a lot of people that this is just, that Biden is not as effective as everyone was saying he was going to be. And hopefully will also bring a lot of scrutiny to other things that he will be heavily involved in. I mean, you already see him even on immigration, which it should be an easy rollback, right? An easy rollback on some of these more kind of like egregious, kind of showboating, very harmful policies. But at the same time, you can detain whole families and get the same effect as separating children, right? That's what Obama did. He detained whole families in these horrific prisons, and you can get the same effect out of that as separating them, and it's the same impact. It was really Trump's kind of bluster and hubris, and the DHS's hubris and just utter contempt, which allowed for that escalation. But it's not necessary. So Biden should, in effect, be able to roll back some of that stuff, the DACA stuff. But now there's this, oh, maybe I will, maybe I won't. I don't know. Who knows what we can actually roll back? And that's troubling. I think the same will go for China, right? Trump and Pompeo, they're building this road for Biden to continue their policies, because, it's not really about Trump. People thought, oh, Trump he is very anti-China. He's so racist against China. But it really is a large section of the elite which want some version of this and are paving a path for Biden to continue it, even though it should be very easy to say, of course we're going to deal with China. We only have hundreds of billions of dollars that corporations need to invest in China. It's only the biggest consumer market in the world. It only makes sense to have some kind of economic friendship, cooperation with China. But
liberals say that they don't like racism,
who knows?
But they're like definitely playing off of Trump's very open racist comments and actions. Like they fucking love that.
And it could, so we could see a stasis there as well. And I think that's the point, is that these forces are so connected. So I don't know if we're gonna see the same. We'll see a sigh of relief. We'll see, like we're seeing now, we'll see kind of a tolerance to imperialism and to the crimes of capitalism. It won't be as effective, but we will see also how Biden's own commitments and his administration's commitments are going to they're going to really make it hard for people to breathe that sigh of relief, because it's the situation is not going to really objectively change in most areas of policy, and a lot of people want to see that. They didn't vote for it, they didn't vote for this change. They want to see it, but they didn't vote for it, right? No one was voting for Biden to do anything. But there is this hope that, all right, you know, the chaos is going to end, and you know, maybe things will be like they were in 2000 whatever 10. You know, like some people are hoping for that. 10 years ago, please just give us back what it was like 10 years ago when we were all getting foreclosed on and stuff. Like, please, like that's what people are hoping for.
Which
But
we're going to see again. We're going to see that in the next couple of months.
Exactly.
Everyone's going to be foreclosed on and evicted. That's
exactly.
That's what we're going to.
Exactly. So it's it's like a quagmire. I mean, it's like blowback. It's like what the U.S. did in Vietnam, what it did in the DPRK, what it did, in, you know, in all of Korea, is kind of coming back, right? It's this quagmire. The U.S. is literally in its own quagmire, and Biden is he's gonna try to smoothly sail through it, but I don't know if there is any real sailing through this. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I think I know, Dave, you have to go, so I'll make my point quick. I think we're seeing a lot of the like Hillary Clinton State Department people back in power. So I think we're going to see a lot more like hawkish positions, but maybe just coded in more liberal humanitarian language. And I think we're going to see another effect of people. I think we kind of already are seeing this effect of like, you know, now we have Biden and Harris, and there's a lot of representation politics going on that soothes the liberals back to sleep, right? So I think we're going to see a lot of that happening again, like we had back with Obama. And I think what needs to happen right now is, we were talking about this earlier, but I think there's a lot of movement chasing going around, and it's being led not by the actual left, by actual socialists. It's being led by the synthetic left, which is rooted in postmodernism. You know, there's no direction, and it's all, and it's like it's being led by the fake left, and it's not really. There's no plan, and there's no like call to action, and it's not really rooted in like a materialist analysis, a class analysis of what's going on. And I think right now what we need to do, we need to get out of the movement, like actual socialists that are among these actual socialist parties here. Need to stop chasing these movements and actually get out to the masses, because that's how you get an actual socialist movement going and program. And I think that's what we need to really be focusing on right now. There's a lot of movement chasing, and we need to get out of the movement and get to the masses, because we've been doing this whole movement thing, and it's not being led by actual socialists. It's all the synthetic left, fake left people who are just clout chasing, and there's no actual socialist program. And it's people don't want destruction and chaos. They want
structure. They
want structure. Yeah, they want structure, and they want peace. They don't want this chaos and destruction. And that's what's turning off people from actual socialism. People are thinking that, you know, aren't really paying attention, that, you know, don't really have time to really read about what socialism is about, is thinking, wow, socialism is about poverty. Socialism is about destruction and deconstructing society. No. It's not about that. Socialism is about prosperity and progress. And that's why we need to get out to the masses and teach them what socialism is actually about, like what the Black Panthers did.
David, did you have anything to add or ask before you have to go?
Yeah, I mean, it sucks that I have to go. I just had a late lunch. Promise meeting, I guess. But yeah, I mean, one thing I guess interesting that while on the topic of new Cold War, you know, like, I'm not sure if you guys know, but a new Call of Duty game called Cold War came out recently. And the one before that, which was what really, like, it came out during quarantine or right before quarantine, and it just blew up. It's Modern Warfare. the first time I ever played that game, I played it and I was like, this is like the most realistic game, most realistic like shoot 'em up game I've ever played. Like almost scary. Like for example, like the airstrike sound was so realistic. And I thought, man, if I was the US government, I would love to have a hand in this. And so I Googled it. And it turns out the Pentagon helped the game developers make Call of Duty more realistic, gave them more, yeah, so it gave them, more like how to make more realistic animations on killing people, cutting their throats, airstriking them, and stuff like that. And and on top of that, I don't know if you guys have seen the new join the army, join the Air Force ads, but they look just like Call of Duty. Like they're in combat and they're like, call an airstrike now, and like you see an airplane, like like it's clearly trying to appeal to because Call of Duty is the most by far the most played game ever.
Yeah.
Not only in the country but in the world. And the new Call of Duty Cold War, it's like a classic, good
Yeah.
good US CIA, bad Russians, bad communists. It's really amazing how this country can keep up this rhetoric, and it works. Over decades and decades, people still swallow it up. It's insane. I mean, I would say even in South Korea, in the media, you don't see that kind of classic cliche good South, bad North, like themes anymore. It's a little bit more complicated than that. But even in South Korea, you don't see that anymore. But in the United States, it's still, very clean cut, good versus bad. It's still in everywhere in mass media. It's pretty insane,
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Amanda Palmer wrote a song about exactly that on her 2008 or 9 album, Who Killed Amanda Palmer. It's called Guitar Hero. It's one of the best songs on the album, but she totally says the N-word, and she's like this problematic white lady from Boston, and it's like, and I love her so much, and the song is really good, and it like touches on that point exactly. But I was also surprised to learn that the Pentagon has like a hand in a lot of like these really cinematic, big budget war movies, like even the Marvel movies, and
they provide equipment. Yeah,
it's so crazy. It's so crazy. I'm shocked, but I'm not surprised.
Yeah, they use video games to recruit. The U.S. Army does too.
Oh yeah.
Especially with the unmanned aerial drone and all strikes and all of that, video games are a key way of showing kind of younger people, especially, that the military warfare is kind of cool.
Yeah.
You can kind of do it from the seat of your desk or whatnot, and that's a huge trend. Actually, there's this podcast, I think it's called Eyes Left, I think. From I forget his name now, but he's a former veteran. He's a socialist. He served in the military, I think during Iraq. And I think he does it with Mike Preisner, I believe. And they talk about, I think they had a whole episode about that, which might be worth checking out. But yeah, this militarism and the way it's embedded in video games, I mean, just look at the messaging that comes out of that, the dehumanization of these countries. You can't see, and part of this going back to the masses is if we can't say that again.
His name is Spencer.
Yeah. He's done a lot of interesting work on this issue, and he experienced it firsthand. And I think, if we're going to be going back to the masses in the movement, we have to be able to talk about, we have to be able to understand that people who live in socialist countries who are building socialism are part of the masses, and their socialist programs are kind of what people want. As we said before, people want stability, they want prosperity, they want peace. All of that is really at the forefront of what China is doing, what Vietnam is doing. Even the DPRK constantly calls for reunification, constantly is trying to work on this denuclearization issue. Not because it wants to give up its defense system, but because it really doesn't want sanctions anymore, and it doesn't want the threat of war. It wants a peace treaty, and reunification is a big part of that. So, yeah, I mean, if we just look at what these countries have been doing, the economic growth that you see in Vietnam, for example, I mean, it is on average like 6 to 10% per year. That's a huge number, and it's rooted in getting people what they need. And it's all about, if you're going to have a market and you're going to trade with other countries, well, you got to make sure that national priorities are protected. You got to make sure that if you want to alleviate poverty for rural farmers, if you're going to invest money in demining, if you're going to do anything, if you're going to get people healthcare and raise their raise their life expectancy, you have to build some kind of wealth. You have to generate wealth in the country, and you have to make sure that people have access to that wealth, that they're not just living. And this has happened in China too. You can't say that, okay, bye, David.
Bye. Sorry about that. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us, David. Feel free to check in to see if we're still on. I can't imagine that we, just say hi.
Of course.
And thank you again. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you so much for good discussions. I look forward to the edited version.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, no, that's okay. That's cool. Good. So yeah, China's poverty alleviation program. They eliminated extreme poverty a month ago.
Yeah, wait. Yeah, actually, I have a question about that.